Here we are on Rimworld. Our objective, build the Vegas Strip in this inhospitable desert environment and make it both thriving and profitable. Our side objective is to try and establish the three families and their respective casinos. Will the house always win or will the house go bust? Greetings, I'm Sophus. Today I'll show you the story of one Robert Edwin House taking on the challenge of making something out of one of the most inhospitable biomes in vanilla Rimworld. If you want to try this for yourself, check the comments below for the mod list. Now, onto the story. Here's the faction setup. I've tried my best to emulate the factions that you usually have in the Mojave Desert with the current setup. In the absence of a Legion as we know it, we have the Western Republic and we have the Civil Outlander Union to represent the NCR. The rest is relatively obvious, or at least represents some sort of faction that would indeed show up, whether that be mutant insects or cannibals and other tribals. The ideal Legion for this run is relatively simple. Nothing all that special about it. Mostly a few things that make sense, such as wanting to trade and wanting to focus on economy and having a little bit of expectation for luxury and better crafting and automation. I could see a case of Mr. House in particular being a transhumanist far as him extending his longevity goes, but that isn't exactly the spirit of the strip, so I try to avoid making his whole faction reflect what is more personal to him and kept it relatively simple, focusing on robots and on making money. As far as Mr. House goes, his skills are pretty straightforward. It's a matter of focusing on what is lawful for him, being good at medical science, social situations, and of course general science and crafting, since he was the CEO of Robco after all. The rest he is not that good at, and I've made him incapable of fighting by himself. He'll have to rely entirely on the might of his Securitrons and his other underlings. At the start, Mr. House will mostly have to rely on his own capabilities to do a few of the tasks, since our robots aren't equipped to do them and we don't have any humans to rely on. Our first random event is unfortunately a solar flare right as the second Militor was being produced, so that we can have some basic defense, even though that isn't that big of a setback, just Randy Random telling us that we're in for quite the ride. Then House doing everything mostly on his own is a little close to a break, so I quickly give him entertainment. Finally, we see some signs of intelligent life out in the waste. A wild woman wanders in, and she's fairly decent. The only problem is that she has an addiction, and also there's a little matter that her type is inherently genetically tied to smoke leaf addiction, and I don't have the production facilities for it. Still, I could enlist her help until she is incapable of moving and eventually dies from lack of the substance. But unfortunately, there is a minor setback. House is unable to tame her, and I just leave her to wander. It isn't long until she picks a fight with the local wildlife and loses, and unfortunately dies, but at least she won't be any trouble for Mr. House. Then we finally have our first raid. It isn't by any means a large raid, but since House is unable to fight by himself and I only have 2 Militors, I am a little bit worried. Things can still go quite alright. And looking at our invader, I hope that we can imprison her. Unfortunately, the Militors are a little bit too effective at what they do, and she perishes. Oh well, perhaps the next one will be more promising. Things advance quite well in the meantime. We are starting to have a decent infrastructure with better research. We have a kitchen, a place to produce our mechs, and now we have a cold storage both for the toxic waste and our food. House even gets a bedroom all of his own. We are starting to see the bones of the Lucky 38, and at least for now, things seem safe. we get our first transport pod crash. It is a fairly decent colonist, but it is an enemy, so even if we do save him, it'll take a little bit of convincing. I turn the Mac room into an improvised cell for him, and for the time being, we'll take care of him and see if we can get him on our side. Another raid hits us, but this time I have far more Militors or Securitrons online. As you can see, he doesn't even get close to melee with our Securitrons. Then we get another pod crash. This one is friendly and his name is Riley. We'll make an improvised medical spot for him in the research room. Wood is hard to come by and House has a lot to do, so for now our prisoners will have to do with the floor. Feeling a little confident in how much Randy Random was giving me transport pod crashes, I let go of the prisoner since he is a lot of work and another mouth to feed, and right now House needs helpers more than he needs hindrances. After all, food is scarce and I may not have the means to sustain him. And Randy Random delivers. We get another pod crash. It is a friendly, so I make a spot next to Riley, just in the research room, so it is very convenient for House. This one won't give us as much trouble. Or so I thought. Another raid comes in and I start preparing to defend for it. With a large Securitron force, I see no issue with it. However, unexpectedly, I get another blessing. The caravan that came to trade with us attacks the raid and deals with it by themselves. So, I am spared a little bit of work. And quite a blessing they are because they also bring us food. After all, House can't do much all by himself, and right now we are feeding 3 people. Thankfully, Riley is the first to make a recovery. He doesn't have all that many skills, but he is a hard worker, so he will be quite reliable. As for Hannah, although she does have some decent skills, I realize that she has paralytic abasia as well as a smoke leaf habit. I may have skipped reading the text a little bit, but we'll make the best of it. After all, she's still friendly, so no conversion necessary. Having to improvise a bit to maintain our food, I use the Securitrons as hunters, gunning down the local wildlife. Not long after, we get another transport pod crash. It's a good colonist, and I hope that we can add this one to our roster. However, he dies shortly before arriving at the medical spot, so nothing I can do about it. Still using the Securitrons as harvesters, I command them to start gunning down the scrap around the base, since we are running a little low on metal. After all, in my hubris, I am building the Lucky 38 mostly out of steel, so any scrap that we come upon will be very important that we smelt down, lest we deplete the map's entire supply of steel and I get myself in a lot of trouble. At the very least, they are very efficient, and it isn't all that much work to smelt down all the scraps that we're getting. Nevertheless, with Riley recovered, I start setting up a few places with iron for him to mine, even if they are a little bit further away from the base. Randy, being not so random, gives us yet another transport pod crash. This one I will try and carry to the base alive, and so I managed to do. House starts tending to her, whilst still handling Hannah's paralytic abasia. Hopefully both recover soon, and we get 2 more colonists to help our rebuilding of the Vegas Strip. We get another raid, but nothing that the Securitrons can handle. After all, there are a lot of them and just a few raiders. Riley's mood as he starts to mine around the map worsens and he gets close to a major break risk. I try my best to give him time to relax, however he refuses to use his time to do any relaxing activity and instead chooses to keep cleaning things and then going back to mining. This results in his major break, which thankfully enough is just some dazed wandering. It doesn't do much, but at least he isn't destroying anything. Sophie makes a recovery, and unfortunately she doesn't choose to join us. Oh well, what a shame, but at least Hannah is still with us. And she does make a full recovery soon enough. She needs quite a bit of recreation, but after that she'll have plenty of tasks to do. And we get less tasks on top of House. He'll have more time to focus on what matters, such as research and getting the Lucky 38, ready to receive some guests. With a little bit of rearranging the structure of the Lucky 38, we have our guest area, with a solo bedroom and a bunk bedroom, as well as the casino floor. The change may look a little radical, but it's mostly a coat of paint and rearranging rooms and furniture. After all, it's still just cheap paved tile that is just looking a little prettier. In setting up a vending machine for the casino floor, we run into a small problem. The food that we have available is unfortunately perishable, so I'll have to research canning and sell canned goods at the vending machine so that we don't have to worry about expiry dates. House is now thankfully able to spend much time on his lab researching away all the technologies, and so we can get all that we need to rebuild the strip faster. And with the comms console installed, we can finally invite people into the strip. And we also finished researching the canning machine so we can provide them with food at a small price. Next, we set up the guest area just to make sure that our visitors don't wander anywhere we don't want to or that might be potentially unsafe for them during their stay in the strip. It seems our first guests had a pleasant stay, and so they leave us a little gift: new shoes for Hannah. With the Lucky 38 functional, we start to focus on other structures on the strip, such as a hydroponics area for our production of food, as well as a power plant so that we can have our energy production centralized. We also start work on the road of the strip and draining the soft sand so we can build Gomorrah across from the Lucky 38. We get another raid, and this time we have a survivor. Even though she's hostile, this time we do have the time, food and resources to try and convert her. But first, of course, the most important part is making sure she is of the same ideology. I promise you I am not in cahoots with Randy Random, because our next visitor is someone called Spurious Caesar, a visitor from the Roman faction. During his stay, we continue working on the strip. As you can see, we now have the bones of Gomorrah, and the streets are looking a little bit more like streets. But it'll still take a lot of steel and time to have it looking prosperous. Frog thankfully joins us, and finally we have enough people to get this ideology going. House gets appointed as the CEO and sole proprietor of the strip, followed by Hannah being given a position as merchant. Since she is the second best one after House with social, she will take on the mantle. Now remember Spurious Caesar, just as he left satisfied with his stay on the strip, he is attacked by a raid that spawns right next to him. And before House has the time to dispatch to the location with his Securitrons, unfortunately Caesar dies, and we get a penalty to our relations with the Romans, or shall I say the Legion. The Securitrons dispatch his killer, which sadly isn't named Brutus, and sadder yet, he is unwaveringly loyal, so I can't even recruit him. So I leave him to die in the desert. Things seem quite prosperous and almost idyllic, at least for Rimworld. During this time I upgrade the power grid and just have to deal with a very minor crop blight. However, we do get a warning sign from Randy Random soon enough. We get a raid. Not a large raid, but one where the assailants are split into two groups, and they're starting to use more dangerous weapons. So we need to up security, and we need to do it now. I finish walling off the southern part of the strip. Even though the north is still open, it at least limits the direction from which our assailants will come. During this time, House finished researching transport pods, and so we'll use them to get rid of a little problem, our toxic waste that is building up. We just send it to some poor cannibal tribe that doesn't even have the technology to send back our trash at us. Oh well, I'm sure they'll take it quite nicely. We get some rain in the desert, which is quite unusual weather, but it is very favorable to deal with the first threat we need to upgrade our selection of mechs. And so I summon the Diabolus. Everyone gets geared up to fight until I remember that Hannah doesn't have a weapon, so she's out for this fight. House gives the other employees a rousing speech, and off to battle we go. And in the first moments of the fight, Frog gets a headshot and shot in the back by Riley. So, time to adapt and send the Securitrons to the front before the mechanoids overrun her. And Frog, you can sit this one out. However, just as she's retreating, she catches a stray shot and is downed. So, she'll have to be rescued whilst we surround the Diabolus with the Securitrons and avoid his attacks. With just a little bit of maneuvering, the battle seems to be going well enough. At least, well enough that Frog can get away from the battle. House is thankfully not targeted during this time, and neither is Riley. The Diabolus seems to be mostly focusing on the Militors shooting at it, and so it's all a matter of repositioning them and keeping the formation wide, whilst flanking from all sides. The other Militors get downed, and so now it's only a matter of making sure that the Diabolus doesn't hit any of the humans, and we sidestep its attacks. It fires off some quite nasty shots, but nothing that really damages our Securitron force in any significant manner. We may just win this thanks to the rain, and thanks to the humans being mostly out of the fight. The only real limitation is House's command range, but even then, it isn't all that hard to sidestep all the attacks. Unfortunately, it aims at a Securitron that is very close to the weapons that Frog dropped. Although the Securitrons can move away from the blast range, the weapon gets instantly vaporized as soon as the shot comes out. But then we defeat the Diabolus just as the range stops. One mission well done. So we retreat to recover from our wounds, and Randy Random sends us a raid just before we can get to Cozy. It isn't a big raid, but everyone is a little bit spread out, and so House musters what little Securitrons are in fighting shape and gets up to deal with this invader. Riley shows up, expecting just to do his normal tasks, and I quickly draft him to join the fight. It's just a little scary, and our invader is dealt with. And so, with the fight done and everyone starting to recover, we have peace upon the strip once more. Now send someone to fetch Mr. House his damn platinum chip.